Dr. Mehmood Khan is the CEO of Hevolution Foundation, a leading force in advancing science for healthy longevity. Now, since its launch, Hevolution has combined venture investment and grant funding to accelerate breakthroughs that extend health span and broaden access globally. We wanted to catch up with Dr. Khan on Hevolution's progress since the Global Healthspan Summit, explore some of the key insights from this latest Global Healthspan report, and really see what's ahead for 2026. And I'm delighted to say that he joins us here today. So, Mehmood, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Keeping busy as always, trying to balance everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, it's been a while since we had our chat back at the Global Healthspan Summit. So, what's been happening with the balance of 2025 with Hevolution?
So, our biggest focus has been as we sort of entered out of the Healthspan Summit, we took a lot of input from, 2,500 people in one way or another, and asked ourselves two or three strategic questions. One of which is, what is our portfolio of research now looking like now that we've got about 250 research grants out there? And yeah, I mean, as you know, we're outside the US government, the biggest funder of this research now. But 5 years into launching the organization, the third year of our grant program, I asked the team to just step back, take a lay of the land before we continue to fund, and avoid duplication or leave big gaps. We took a few months first from the field, took it in at the summit, debriefed, and then we started looking at the literature. And of course, as you know, we've been working on the Global Healthspan Report and all of that input to sort of ask the question, what's the next 5 years look like? In terms of not only the magnitude of our grants, but the areas of focus. So that's one big thing. We did the same with our investments, and the investments have continued now to make great progress. I think you and I talked about it last time. We had one company. Now, all four of our first investments, those companies have moved from preclinic into clinic. So at the clinical stage, great due diligence. Bill Green and the team have done a wonderful job of identifying the science team, supported them in the due diligence of the science. And now the question is, what more do we do? And the third is, as we sort of finalize our intramural program, we've completed the design work, the discussions with potential partners. Now we're ready, actually, in our next board meeting, to present a business plan for this future research institute. Don't have it approved yet, but that's the last 6 months' work, and the team has been very, very busy getting ready to launch what I call 2.0.
Okay, that's great. Well, I guess I'd love to talk a little bit more about those donations that you've made, and maybe lean in a little bit to this 5-year mapping that you're thinking about. And of course, when we remember back when Hevolution launched, there was obviously this announcement about the annual budget of about $1 billion. I guess have you hit that yet, or are you still ramping up into that number?
No, we're continuing to ramp up, and the same limitations exist. One, the capacity of the field to absorb, right? Now that we've looked at probably 2,000 some research proposals, we've got a pretty good idea of the sort of ideas coming in, and there's always 10 or 20% exceptional, and then there's a lot of sort of me toos and maybe not consistent with our core mission. And so as we now look at where do we go from here, how do we do it, one of the things that is going to be necessary that we've identified is that we need to create more directed research partnerships. And what I mean by that is not just playing a passive role, which was our first phase. Hey, send us your best ideas, and it will score them. We'll send them to an independent review panel, and if they like it, score it highly, and it's ethically appropriate, we'll fund it. And that was our modus operandi to start with. Now we have 4 research partnerships which are multi-year, where we have actually gone to the research community with a specific area of focus. Said, for example, we really want to understand protein balance at the cellular level and so-called proteostasis. Who are the best experts in that? Who have the best research tools to do that? And we identified Northwestern University, Rick Miyamoto, world expert at doing that, and went to him and said, listen, this is the area we want. Can you put together a multi-center research team around this mission, this question of addressing? And that's what he did. How do we do more of that? So that's fewer in number, but bigger, longer, mission-focused research funding as grants. And our role as a partner is A, identify the strategic area of interest, B, find who are the real experts at this. But what makes this unique is that we're encouraging people to find the best contributors from wherever they are in the world. Governments don't do that. Right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So in this mapping that you've done, you've identified areas where you feel that there is a gap or a disconnect between the science and the self-allocation of companies into that science. Very interesting, Mehmood. So,
and it's not just companies, right? It's academics, because a lot of time academicians like to continue down pursuing their traditional trajectory because that's what they know the best.
Yeah. So I guess in this 2.0 that you referred to, I guess this will be something that you will start to actively pursue internally. Will you be going public with those gaps that you feel exist in the overall science?
Well, the best way of going public is when we identify the partnerships and we put together, we announce the partnerships.
Yeah.
So we identified a gap in translating preclinical academic work into the clinic. So our partnership with Buck Institute is a multi-year grant for Buck to develop a translational program. The largest, longest standing aging research institute hasn't gone into humans. And so it was a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? Because if you don't have the basic data, typically governments don't give you grants. Our grant, I would like to think, and Eric, the CEO, can comment himself, allowed that to be accelerated, right? And so by doing that, they've now got a very successful, growing translational research program. That's an example of, hey, there's a gap. How do we help?
Yeah, got it. I mean, obviously, I'd love an opportunity to speak with Bill Green about what you're doing on the venture side of things, but maybe let's look at a little bit more, if I would term it, philanthropic investing that you are doing, which of course is, is not, without its strategy that sits behind it. You mentioned the Buck. What types of other organizations? I guess there's a mixture of large and small that you're working with.
Yeah. So if you think about the spectrum of 250 grants out there, they're everything to, 20, 30, $40 million grants as a multi-team grant. I gave the example of Northwestern, to as small as $1 million grant. In the early days, we funded even smaller seed grants. Somebody has an idea, nobody will fund it. They need, a couple of $100,000 just to test the hypothesis. Quick turnaround. We did those too. And so we've had the full spectrum and we'll continue to do that. The question is really the mix of the portfolio. Because if we're successful, then the field should progress. And if the field is progressing, then we should be increasing our funding further and further along in that value chain, right?
Yeah.
And I guess always be right at the start of the funnel.
Yeah, I guess it's a sort of classic thing, isn't it? Right, where sometimes you can only work with what's being presented to you, and in this 2.0 iteration, you're going out and hunting for what you want now.
Well, and add to it our brand, right? 5 years ago, but Hevolution didn't exist.
Yeah.
Year one, I went on a road trip around the world, introducing Hevolution as an organization, and people sort of semi looked at us cross-eyed, wondering, what? Hevolution, where are you? What do you do? Who are, And it went from that to our first Healthspan Summit that you were part of, our second. And now, frankly, in the field, I don't have to introduce Hevolution. So the brand has evolved because of the track record, and we can now be increasingly more directive, right?
Yeah, understood. And I guess, with the fact that, of course, you're coming out of Saudi Arabia, we're seeing that the GCC region really seems to have switched into the Healthspan thesis. Feels a little bit like, the whole region is becoming much more targeted and aggressive in its ambitions in the space. What evidence are you seeing on the ground in relation to, the fact that you're in Saudi Arabia? There are lots of meetings about, big capital coming in, big healthcare programs. Are you seeing it pulling through now?
Well, I think the best evidence for that, as an example, is the Vision 2030, which everybody talks about. Saudi Arabia and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince announced Vision 2030 is the strategic North Star for the kingdom. In it is a clear statement that one of the ambitions is healthy aging. So I would like to think that, our work has contributed to crystallizing this thinking from not just maintain a healthy population, make sure it ages in a healthy way. But this is very important to the Middle East and Gulf countries for a public health reason. Everybody quotes that the population is young. It is. 60% of the population is under 30. But the birth rate in the kingdom, for example, is now just hovering around 2.5. And as you know, the population replacement rate requires a birth rate of 2.17. So while the population is young, it's that young population will age without a young population at the same magnitude behind it. And couple that with a high prevalence of metabolic disease, diabetes, and then now increasingly cardiovascular disease and cancers that are age-related, it's clear to the leadership that we need to intervene in the young population now, or we will observe the population go through what Northern Europe, Western Europe, and North America have experienced already, or Japan and South Asia. So you have two choices, right? You can say, I'm going to watch and see what happens. Well, we already know the answer to that. Or I'm going to try will it work? And there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
But doing the same thing is not the answer, right?
No, understood. Yeah, I mean, I guess when you compare population pyramids, it's when you've got a beautiful pyramid shape, then that's great. But of course, when you slice that with a Western society, you can see all sorts of anomalies there. And talking about the US particularly, there's been a lot of transition happening in the USA at the moment. A lot of science. I mean, our report last year showed that that's where so much of the capital was going. But do you see that there's a transition in the center of gravity away from the US and more focused into the GCC?
Well, I think, first of all, the US, in terms of the size of the ecosystem, will continue to lead in the foreseeable future. If you think about the percentage of financial capital, number of biotech startups, the amount of research coming out of different pockets, whether it's Northeast, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, San Diego, pockets and sectors at large size. The reality is, even the UK and North and Europe has not been able to emulate those ecosystems.
Yeah.
Hence, we've seen big pharma set up R&D centers in Boston, even European and British ones, right? But is the center of gravity balancing out more? So skewed? Yes. We're seeing increasing interest in investing in biotech in Europe. We're seeing that in the Middle East. And Japan, of course, has a long pharma industry, increasingly looking at biotech. But the wild card in this, which rarely gets discussed, is what's going to happen from China. And the China, if you look at the number, two statistics. One, the number of top-rated journal publications. I'm talking about Science, Nature, Cell, etc. Those have gone up like this, with Chinese authors from Chinese institutions. It used to be Chinese authors from Western institutions. That's not the case. The second is, in the last couple of years, take a look at the number of big pharma companies doing licensing deals with China startups.
I saw
30-40%, right?
Yeah.
I think those two pieces of evidence would suggest that the balance is global. It's a global interest, and the Gulf and the Middle East is playing a part in that.
Yeah, through capital deployment, but also from a societal level, trying to implement the technologies
policy, from a policy framework, as I mentioned, Vision 2030, an area of focus for the health system and really thinking about healthcare, not sick care, because we have a relatively healthy population still.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, the deployment of capital, but also the development of human capital. We funded the first 20 Saudi research scientists to actually establish their first neuroscience research programs in Saudi universities. 2 years ago, that didn't exist. Aging was not a field of research interest in developing emerging markets. And now we're seeing that.
Yeah. And do you see, I mean, we're seeing a little bit of a thawing, I would say, about the, the biotech winter that we've been in. And obviously we saw Eli hit, $1 trillion valuation a few weeks back. We're seeing, as you say, China is becoming a very strong out-licensing geography. Would you see that Hevolution would be working in China? Is that something that would be on the horizon, or would you see your earlier stage in the the sort of deal flow process of all of that?
Well, first of all, we want to invest in the best ideas. We've always said, look at our mission. It is to extend a healthy lifespan for the benefit of all, right? And in that, you have to be inclusive. And it really is, where's the best ideas? And if the best ideas are coming from Europe, we'll go there. North America, we'll go there. Asia, hey, American pharma companies are licensing technology from Japan and China and Singapore. And so we've got our eyes open. The challenge for us right now, and for me as CEO, is the limitation of my own human capital. There's only so fast you can build the organization, the processes, the systems, and everything else. Remember, we've only been doing this for 36 months. NIH has done it for 70, 80 years, the UK equivalent. So we're building all of that, and I'm very cautious not to open the floodgates in too many geographies before we can actually, in a diligent way, provide the support that these reach. It would backfire. So absolutely on our radar screen, we're looking at it, we're watching it, but I want to make sure that we have matured everything that we need to. We have plenty yet to do in UK and Europe.
Yeah, and of course, you've expressed very clearly that your 2.0 strategy is much more focused now on where you want to go. You've just published the second edition of the Global Healthspan Report. I read it over the weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, and of course I'm sorry.
You helped shape our thinking in it.
Yes, well, of course, yeah. It feels like a while back now, but I feel that there were some very interesting points that came out of that, Mehmood, and I think that we've seen double living investments in 2023, but we still see that Healthspan is very under invested as a field. Are you seeing any pickup on that now with the GLP-1 and all the things that people are talking about in relation to prevention?
Look, there's clearly more interest in investing in this space. Doubling is a small base, so it's relatively easy to double, but we're clearly seeing interest. For example, in the companies we invested in early, we have other sources of private capital investing in those same companies. That's a good sign. We are seeing inbound interest for funds, both research and philanthropy, wanting to explore ways that we could work together to grow the pie. As you've heard me say before, if we end up being the 10th smallest player in this space, I will celebrate. So we're seeing this inbound interest. We're seeing the number of clinical trials, for example, as you saw in the report, 30 clinical trials now underway in humans for senolytics. That's significant. So there's areas that are getting traction. They're moving into doing human trials. And one or two of those succeeding is the path to that next GLP-1 frontier, right? What I still take a pause about is that, yes, we have a pharma company now worth $1 trillion. Look at the tremendous benefit society gets from the pharma industry, the biotech industry, whether it's cancer therapy, obesity, what have you. And yet, we only have one company worth $1 trillion, and the whole industry's market cap is paled by the market cap of digital companies. And so you have to ask yourself, where's the market putting its value right now versus all of these are there. So I'm hoping eventually we'll see a rebalancing of this, and that capital should start flowing back. But the signs are there, the evidence is there, and you need one or two of these GLP-1 equivalents, and suddenly people will say, I have to invest.
Yeah. I mean, I guess.
Challenge also, as you know well, is time horizons.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
I mean,
know, the GLP-1s were around 25 years ago.
quite.
Okay. AI, nobody had heard of the term 10 years ago, really. And so shorter time horizons attract that immediate capital.
Yeah.
This is a
Well,
long
yeah. I want to get to the stage where the biotech sector feels like the tech sector at the moment. I mean, it's going to take a while for us to get there, but it won't have escaped your attention, Mehmood, that, consumer demand is really starting to pick up out there, right? I mean, there's a lot of concern about, peak hype and so on. So with this consumer appetite and knowledge now, what sort of opportunities and challenges, because this is reflecting what was in the report, what are the opportunities and challenges of that?
Well, I think there's two statistics I want to mention in that report that highlight both sides of the equation, opportunity and challenge. One is about 80% of people across the world that we ask agree and want the governments, their respective governments, to fund research in healthy aging and health span. So that's that's a great statistic, right? 80%. 40% are concerned about inequality and the challenge of access and the potential for haves and have-nots of leaving people out. Okay, that's very understandable. So we have the opportunity, and how do you translate that pull from the citizens to the traction with policymakers that ultimately have to make the decision where to prioritize, okay, what to invest in? I mean, frankly, you take a percentage of what we're putting in capital in data centers and target healthy aging, and look at the huge potential return. We'll come back to that. But the ROI is clear. The economic argument is clear. But how do you prioritize it in the time horizon we're talking about? Now, the second is, how do we make sure that we keep everybody inclusive and people trust it? That's the key.
And I guess that we're starting to see that in the US with GLP-1s on Medicare, and there's some whole dynamics now that are really changing in the marketplace. And another piece that came out of the report was really this call for leadership in changing policy and the need for innovation at a leadership level. So, are you seeing some indications of that coming out of Saudi Arabia, or are you seeing in other parts of the world, or do you still think that we're in these 5-year political cycles that are going to limit what we're trying to do within the health span industry?
Well, the advantage of some countries, such as in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, is where leadership doesn't change every 3 to 5 years. You can actually have a short-term and a long-term vision. And we're seeing that, right? The second is, this is a young population, and it has a high trust level for technology. 60% of the population is under 30. They grew up with digital. And so they are interconnected, they're digitally connected, they're very comfortable sharing data, all the rest of it, with the right governance and oversight, which exists. But we have, simple example, during COVID, in Saudi Arabia, I had a digital passport. It showed me my vaccination status, and it was a national thing. And if it was green, I could come and go. If I got vaccinated, it showed it. And if I was tested positive, immediately changed color. I flew here from the US, and I had a paper card with my vaccine written on it. Okay? The technology existed, it's the acceptance. It's the leadership from the top. So that's an example of it is in a different era, in part because of the fact that you can actually leapfrog. There's not the old infrastructure, but secondly, the population is very accepting, and it's easy to do that. All of that is happening as we speak. The key really is, as these technologies come online, how do you deploy them at scale? And we haven't got the answer to that yet. I think that transition from sick care to healthcare is a strategic key shift. But that will take strong leadership, and there's a lot of support in this part of the world for that sort of leadership. Not just here, Singapore is a very good example where the government changed the age limit for preventive aging care, annual physicals and support from 60 down to 40. They recognize that if you're going to help people stay healthy as they get older, you got to start at 40, not at 60.
Yeah. So putting that into shape then, in relation to Hevolution and the report that you've produced and how that, obviously with deployment of capital, and you mentioned your 2.0, which obviously is a much more strategic view on where you see the change needs to happen. With Hevolution's, let's call it reach and connection with politicians and so on, do you see that you'll be doing more active work on the, for want of a better word, lobbying side of things to really start sharing more of this knowledge? Because we're seeing stuff in the market. You mentioned Singapore. Singapore's a great example, but we're also seeing what's happening in Montana in the States, where people are going, look, we want to get to this stuff sooner. So we're at a state level, we're going to start deregulating. So for me, that feels like there's the ground, the baseline for new policy change to happen, perhaps on a much more accelerated basis as people start to see the benefit of what's coming through with these preventative therapeutics, and of course what that means from a national macroeconomic perspective.
Look, we don't lobby, and we don't believe it's our role to tell different governments how they should think about policy and framework. However, there are two things we can do far more effectively. One is provide the factual evidence, both on the scientific rationale, the human public health rationale, and the economic rationale of why this makes sense. And that's best done through educational fora, inviting policymakers, leaders to engage in that conversation and start to understand what the evidence is. And we're doing that. And we'll continue to do that. And that's a very important part of our mission, was this advocacy role. It's part of the pillars on which we were created. The second is to provide information that is more regional, if not country specific. Because, a lot of time leaders will look at this and say, oh, this is great. But you know what? I'm not from there. Or my people are different. And so, for example, we developed the first ever Saudi-specific Healthspan Report, which aggregated the public health data around aging and the science and what's going on in the kingdom, and presented that to leaders to understand. It's their job to translate it and make decisions around it, but are informing them. We do that across the world wherever we can. We've done it for the Gulf. We've done it in North America. It's often taking what they already have, but putting it into the context of this, and sometimes through research, generating new data. Training advocates, but through academic scientists who actually can go and present their data to their own leadership. So that's how we see this, and I think we've seen good traction and good evidence for that. I have been invited by numerous ministers, Europe, Asia, and the equivalent secretary as in the US, to come and present. That's by invitation. Hey, want to hear more about this? I heard this. Sometimes I can be provocative, right? When I was in a European country, I think earlier this year, we had a whole group of people from the media, but also Minister of Health, senior people. And I made the provocative statement. I said, unfortunately, I don't have the right person here who I should be talking to. And that's the Minister of Finance. A week later, I got a call from his office.
Okay.
Saying, we need to talk.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And I guess it's kind of like, well, building a picture from our conversation, Mehmood, it strikes me that the strategic approach for 2026 is moving more into these five defining areas that you wish to move into, building out, more substance around the evidence from a country by country perspective. I've heard those things today. What else is Hevolution going to be leaning into in 2026?
I think the key is going to be this launch of this next phase for us, right? How that shapes the next Healthspan Summit is going to be an important thing, because, as we do it every other year. So 26, we'll be thinking about this, reporting out to the world the progress made from the first several $100 million of investment that we've made. Okay. And then asking ourselves through either the right groups, we've done a lot of this already, but we want to validate it with the expert community to say, so are we interpreting this right? Get that opinion. Rethinking about refreshing our advisory boards. Not that they haven't done it. One of the things I said right at the start when we convened our expert panels is I wanted them to be term limited. Having served in such bodies over the years, you want to keep bringing in fresh ideas, right? Different parts of the scientific community have different perspectives. All of that is part of 26. And it will, I think, set us up right for what that future trajectory should be.
Yeah, great. And for yourself, Mehmood, obviously, you've kind of been super busy, I guess it sounds like, over 2025. Are you still enjoying the journey?
I'm having a blast, but I'm not getting younger. I'm 5 years
None
older.
of us are.
And so it's important for any leader to be thinking about succession planning from the day you take your job. And so the good news is we've got great people who continue to develop. And some of my people may end up in other organizations. For example, if we develop an intramural program through partnerships, that's a separate operating entity. They are, it's like the fledgling is ready to fly. They need to go on and do their own thing. And, we'll provide the mentoring, but the day-to-day operational doesn't need my office to do that. So I think we'll see a transformation of how we operate as we scale in a different model. Remember, it's the classic, the startup has a certain structure. And then as you scale, it often results in a completely different operating model by design. And we're going through all of that right now, is what is the best way for us to scale in a sustainable way.
Great. Well, Mehmood, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and wish you a good end of the year, and looking forward to seeing your announcements as they start rolling out in 2026. So thanks for joining us today.
You've been part of the journey. I appreciate always the intellectual input and your knowledge, and thank you for your support and help.
Great, Mehmood. Good to see you.
Bye.